Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming in. Can you start off by telling me a little bit about yourself? How long have you been working here? What do you have any particular hobbies that you enjoy, etc., etc.?
Sure. So my name is Mary Bierman. I've been with the Visitor Center a little bit over a year. Prior to that, I was actually a nurse for 35 years. I worked in a pediatric and adult asthma and allergy practice. And I also had the opportunity to travel all over the world doing volunteer medical missions. So it was on those trips that I always, whenever I went anywhere new, I'd like to take a walking tour. So that kind of got me interested in the walking tours. And then it got when people came to visit me, I would take them to Minuteman National Park or in downtown Boston. So it was just sort of a natural flow as I retired to kind of move into this, and I'm really enjoying it.
The Concord Visitor Center offers a bunch of different kinds of tours. Is there anyone that's your favorite in particular?
I really like working with the kids. So I like the family tours, and I also like the tours that we offer for the school groups. I think it's a lot of fun. I think you have a really great opportunity to introduce kids to some concepts that they might not know, get them interested in history a little bit.
Do you ever find that it's particularly challenging, or there's kind of a different way that you give tours based off the age of your tour participants?
Oh, absolutely. I had a kindergartner on the tour once. He's not going to sit still to listen to. I mean, I was like, go find the rock that says, Henry David Thoreau's jail site on the ground. So it was more of a scavenger hunt of a tour. I also had a tour one evening, a private tour, and all of them were from Great Britain. So you kind of have to tell your story, tell the American Revolution story maybe a little bit different. And also they're looking at me, I'm saying, this is the old hill burying ground. Well, that's modern times for them. You meet such interesting people. And without a doubt, on every tour, I have learned something from the participants, or they've asked me a question I didn't know the answer to, and then I've gone home and gone down that rabbit hole to find the answer. So it's that give and take that I really like a lot.
So on tours, you often discuss Concord literary history, specifically during the 19th century. Out of Alcott, Emerson, Thoreau, and Hawthorne, who is your favorite to talk about?
I like to talk about Thoreau. I find that the whole jail site story, even people who are from Concord don't necessarily know that story. And I like to be able to tie it into civil disobedience, Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King. So I like to be able to bring that social justice piece in to the tour, and I think Thoreau naturally leads that through.
Yeah. Would you mind briefly telling the story?
So there's a jail site right off Monument Square, and I don't have my notes in front of me, but I want to say 1846. Henry David Thoreau was living out at Walden Pond, going back and forth to visit his family. One of his trips back, he ran into the town jailer, Sam Staple, and Sam approached him and said, Henry, you have to pay your taxes. You haven't paid your taxes. It wasn't very much, I forget, maybe a few dollars. But Henry, being a man of principle, decided that he was not going to pay the tax. He was going to spend the night in jail. And he was put in jail right off Monument Square. You'll see the little rock on the ground that marks the spot. It said that he was bailed out in the morning by a woman in a black veil, most likely his aunt. But he has written extensively that one night in jail was the inspiration for what's probably one of his most famous works, Civil Disobedience. Now, civil disobedience, as I mentioned, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi have all cited that as the inspiration for their political beliefs. So I think it's definitely worthwhile to tell that story on the tours.
So, like all places, Concord has some pretty tough history. What approach do you take, especially since you're interested in talking to kids, when you try to describe the more difficult parts of Concord's past?
Well, I think it's important to be honest about it. We can't just swipe these things under the ground. Talking about, say, the Robbins House or John Jack's story, you have to tell that, yes, Concord did have enslaved people. And sort of with kids, I like to sort of talk about, yes, this was happening, but what were people trying to do about it, like the Concord Female Anti-Slavery Society, and the bringing in speakers into town. So I just think the important thing is not to ignore it. We have to learn from history, so that's what I try to highlight.
This is a little bit of a lighter question, but do you have a favorite fun fact to tell on tours?
Favorite fun fact? I think people really like the story of the bell on the First Parish Church. That's kind of a fun fact because even if I don't get to it, invariably someone will say, "What's that bell for?" And people who have grown up in Concord, who have driven by that bell every day, don't know the story, even though there is a little plaque there. So that's kind of a fun little fact.
So, although we go over a lot in our tours and at the visitor center, it's impossible to see everything in Concord. So, what lesser known thing do you consider a must see when visiting?
I like to encourage people, especially people who like to walk and hike, to do the Emerson Thoreau Amble. They can do it on their own. We offer it through the visitor center, but it's also an easy enough walk to do on their own. It goes from Emerson's house to Thoreau's cabin site. It goes through some absolutely gorgeous woods, past the pond out there, and then, as I said, to the cabin site. And it's very well marked, and there's QR codes that explain everything along the way. So I think that's a fun, off the beaten path thing for people to do.
How would you describe the style in which you give your tours?
Style. I try to make it. I like to tell stories. So I want to give all the history, but I like to do it, as I said, telling stories. So maybe telling stories about the indigenous people, or then moving on to the story of the robbery at the bank. I think it kind of can bring to life the town a little bit if people get to know specific individuals and what they did in the town.
What is a common question that you often get asked during tours?
Well, it can be anything from why did the American Revolution start in Concord, which I think is a great question. Because especially you were on a school group with us last week, these kids come out from all over the country and why did we just ride a bus 20 miles out of Boston? Why did the American Revolution start here in this little town? So I think that's a pretty common question.
Do you have any final thoughts?
I would encourage anyone to take the tour. I would say, even if you've lived in town your whole life, so a lot of times we'll get people who come in to take the tour with out-of-town visitors, and they'll invariably will say at the end, "Wow, I learned so much. I've lived here for 23 years and I didn't know that." So I would say take even the town tour or try one of the other tours. It's really fun to learn a little bit more about the place you live.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Natalie. This was fun.